Welcome to the Paru Zings Appraisers on Purpose podcast. This podcast showcases inspiring appraisers and professionals from the industry who are leaders in their field. How did they get to where they are? What have they learned along the way? And what do they do now for their teams, their clients, and the industry? Your host is real estate investor, entrepreneur, and appraiser, Michael Hobbs.
Welcome back. I hope you're having a fantastic fall. And can you believe 2023 is moving on as quickly as it is? I know some of us wish it was over, given the experience we've had in the industry, but for some of us, there are some bright spots out there. And I think today our guest is going to give some perspective on just how broad the market is and how deep it is, even though overall, of course, things are a lot slower. But before we jump in, of course, remember, if you haven't done it already, please grab a hold of this audio where you're listening to it. Make sure to like it and to share it, because as you do that, it gets out to more people, has a greater impact, and encourages more of our peers for what's possible in this industry that has a lot of life left in it. So with that, I'm really excited today to have Steve Albert as our guest. As you're going to hear, Steve is a fascinating individual and has just a phenomenal perspective on the industry and a lot of history as well. Steve, thanks for joining us.
Good morning. You're welcome.
Wonderful, wonderful. So Steve, we always love to hear, so were you born this way or how did you get into the profession?
Yeah, I think like a lot of appraisers, at least my age, they came into the profession through a family member.
Yes.
And no different for me. My father started Allstate Appraisal in the 1950s. And after college, which was graduation in 1986, I came to work at Allstate Appraisal. And that's really the whole story of how I got started.
That's amazing. So if it was started in the 50s, did you have any choice around the dinner table to talk about things other than appraisal? I mean, if that was the work that was putting the food on the plate for the family.
You know, I would attend, my father was active as an instructor with the National Association of Independent Fee Appraisers during the 70s and 80s. And so I would have occasion to go to conferences with him when I was a little bit older, maybe in my early teens, and I would just pay attention.
Yeah.
And of course, you know, at the dinner table on occasion, he might discuss something of interest that may have occurred that day or that week. But it was just a fairly normal childhood, you know, growing up in the suburbs. And I didn't focus on what my father did until I really was in college and was considering what my career options were.
Oh, fascinating. See, it's quite interesting because different people have also had the opportunity to be brought up in a family of appraisers and valuers. Man, they knew what a tape measure was before they knew what their first toy truck was. So it seems that was not the case for you there, Steve.
I'm sure if I dug back in the memory banks, there would be moments where I probably had greater exposure than somebody whose father wasn't an appraiser.
Sure.
To appraiser speak, but it really wasn't a center point of my upbringing. I think my father did his thing each day, recognized I was too young to appreciate that, and began discussing my career options with me really when I was in college.
Oh, wow. So did you have grandiose plans to become, you know, like an engineer or a doctor, or was it always kind of like you're going to college and you're going to get to know more about what dad's doing?
You know, I have to say it wasn't a very romantic introduction. I think probably in the back of my mind, I recognized that I had the opportunity to work, you know, in a family business, but I didn't spend a lot of time giving consideration to other professions. I mean, when I was much younger, you know, my family's always been involved in camping and appreciation for the outdoors. And there was a moment or two where I'd actually considered, I'm almost embarrassed to say, but I'd considered being a forest ranger for a moment or two when I was very young. And my father...
Steve, you don't realize this, but one of our guests in this season actually studied in that space and fully intended to be there. Now, of course, now they're not, but I mean, it's a very interesting integration. So there's nothing at all that is unusual about your interest.
You know, my father had said to me, not to dash my dreams, how you know, weak they may have been or how unplanned they may have been. But he had said to me, and I remember this, maybe not verbatim, but he said, that's wonderful if that's the career that you choose. He said, but you know, if you enjoy the outdoors so much, you might pursue a career that can produce the opportunity to make enough income that allows you to enjoy the outdoors, not from a professional perspective, but recreationally. Okay. And he said, real estate is one of those industries that you might give consideration to.
That's a fantastic perspective to really set a sight in the future, as opposed to just saying, go do this.
Yeah. So I didn't have a directive to get involved in this industry. He didn't push me. There was some gentle encouragement. But I will say that the day I graduated from college, maybe it was within a few days, I was already en route to Ohio State University to take my first of many appraisal classes with the Appraisal Institute. So I took my first 2 classes, I think, in June of '86, and I graduated in May of '86. So he was already pushing me into the educational curriculum right out of college.
Wow. And you mentioned you were taking those classes at the Ohio State University.
Well, for the first 2, because the classes were being held sporadically throughout the year, you could take them back to back if you were willing to travel to different universities who were sponsoring the respective courses.
That is fascinating. Is that practice still in place, or is that something that's kind of gone by the wayside?
I don't know for sure. I assume it's probably similar to this day. I don't think you can just take every single class if you're working towards a professional designation back to back in one location. I don't know definitively, but I would assume that it's probably similar because it was a great experience being in different parts of the country at different college campuses taking these courses. I took them through the Appraisal Institute. And I was young and impressionable and never had traveled. And it was just enjoyable learning about this profession in locations I hadn't been to before.
So you get to hop over from the Chicagoland area over to Columbus, which is where the Ohio State is located, if I'm not mistaken. And then was it a full week intensive, or what were the courses like there? Because I know a lot of people haven't had the opportunity to take that type of coursework.
Well, I thought the courses were exceptional. They were week-long classes with the exam on the final day of the week. If I recall correctly, they may have been 5 business days. In fact, here on my shelf in my office, I have all of the coursework from every class I've ever taken. I actually have a bookshelf. People my age still have paper files and books that we refer to. I look at some of the younger employees that work at my company with me, and their offices are stark with just computer screens and a chair and a desk, but there's nothing really else other than family photos. My office looks like it did. It's very neat and organized, but I still carry copies of all the books and copies of USPAP and textbooks that I've read right on my shelf, and I reference them with some regularity.
I can just say that warms my heart to hear that. I was having a conversation with a team member who's been around the profession for a while and more recently took some appropriate education courses. And I was asking him, I said, hey, this is something that I'm pretty sure it's in the course that you took. Could you just check on that? And he replied to me and said, well, Michael, I took that class. It was an online class. It was a good class, but I don't have anything. I'm like, what do you mean you don't have anything? I'm like, I've got like manuals and boxes. Like I can go get a hold of stuff. He goes, yeah, I had like 1 year access to the information, then it was gone afterwards. I'm like, what good is that? I'm like, you need to have access to that information.
Yeah, I definitely, take advantage of technology, of course. I mean, I print out appraisals and then put them in a file drawer. We haven't done that in many, many years, but there's a certain element of comfort in seeing books or I should say the 3-ring binders of the coursework that I took, in my formative years when I was working towards my designation and ultimately towards licensure. I think that was 1993. And it's fun to look back through my notes, my handwritten notes in some of these class texts, these textbooks that I still have here, where I'd actually sign my name, and then next to my name, I'd write the designation I was pursuing to see what it looked like. I hadn't attained the designation yet, but I wanted to see what it would look like if I was able to attain it.
I love that. You were future casting, as I've heard some people say, like calling it as though it is and working towards it.
Yeah,
Projecting. I love that. So here it is. You graduate from college, you start taking classes, and you join your dad at a company that's now been around for decades. What was that experience like, since many people don't have that opportunity these days?
Well, I mean, for me, it really was a wonderful opportunity. My father, he worked until his mid-80s. I don't think he would call it work. He just enjoyed the profession. He very much enjoyed working with me. We're a large firm, so we have a lot of employees that have been here many years. We have employees that literally have been here up to 43 years. And
amazing.
That's our longest standing employee. She's been here 43 years and she's only in her early 60s. She began working here at 18. Wow. And we've got a lot of staff members that have been here for their entire career. So the culture here, seems to be conducive to people feeling comfortable and hopefully feeling fulfilled to the extent that they don't look for other opportunities as frequently as maybe other industries. I don't know what it is.
Sure.
Maybe they would disagree with that privately, but the point is we do have a lot of employees that have been here a long time. So you asked me what it was like. It was it was and continues to be a very fulfilling and enjoyable professional experience for me. My father and I had a uniquely warm relationship. We worked very well together. We had our own different sets of skills. He had certain skill sets that, I would never be able to emulate. And I had certain skill sets or interests that, he either didn't pursue or maybe that wasn't his focal point. But, we were a local appraisal firm in the 80s. And then over time, as a result of my appetite and my marketing efforts and so forth, we began to expand beyond the Chicago metro area.
Fascinating. So what was it like coming into a firm, then in this case, your dad owns it and you're new to the profession? How did the training go for you? Were you just kind of another new appraiser in the mix, or did you have to get the family training, which is like 3 times harder than everybody else's? Like, how was that experience?
Well, I had to earn it. I definitely had to earn it. I had to earn my position among the tenured employees here who saw, Warren Albert's son coming into the company. He never wanted there to be the impression that he was handing me anything. In fact, he had encouraged me in 1986 to pursue employment with other Chicago appraisal firms. And then after a couple of years, then to come work for the company once I've learned the industry. And I did, in fact, undergo that effort, reaching out to a variety of appraisal firms in Chicago. And I understand, I guess in retrospect, that I wasn't warmly received. I remember comments. They were friendly comments, but they were honest comments saying, you're Warren Albert's son. What am I going to train you? And then as soon as you're making money from my firm, you're going to go to a family firm. I'd rather not invest the time. And I remember being annoyed initially because I was too young and didn't have any wisdom or experience. And now as a business owner for so many years, of course, I understand that. But there were some people that did give me the opportunity. And for at least a few months after college, while my father was still training me, I had the opportunity to work as an independent contractor for some downtown Chicago appraisal firms on a commission basis.
Yes.
And even during that short amount of time, I gained some perspective of how other firms were conducting their business operations. And it was interesting and valuable to me. But I had to earn it. I definitely did. And I wasn't mature coming out of college. I was a college person, a college-minded person. I wasn't focused on my profession. That comes in time.
Yes.
But I would say in pretty short order, the industry really did capture my attention. I began to find it very interesting. And then I began pursuing that professional designation path that I discussed earlier. And it became a very pronounced focus for me to be the best I can be in this industry through education and experience.
We've heard that from a number of our peers over the past couple seasons, that importance of a personal desire to not just stay stable, if you will, but to continue to learn and grow, to invest in themselves, and along the way have an opportunity to do great work and to have an impact for clients.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure anybody you've talked to, any of your peers, me included, can tell you that there's appraisal reports that we've authored in our early days that we wouldn't put in our art gallery on the office walls as being indicative of the flawless work that we hope to do today. And maybe flawless is too strong of a word. That isn't our goal to be flawless. Our goal is to be credible and compliant. And that having been said, it's a process, like any profession, like any job. I think first you have to enjoy what you're doing, and you have to want to get better at what you do. You have to honestly pursue excellence. And there are no shortcuts. There are just no shortcuts. Mm-hmm. And there are plenty of moments I've had, in the 37 years I've been here, where I found things very challenging, sometimes seemingly insurmountable challenges. But, you and I were talking earlier, and I said that as I get older, I tend to use more and more cliches. But the reality is no pain, no gain, right? Strength through adversity, and any other number of cliches that our fathers may have conveyed to us when we were younger that we now use, because it's true. There's no shortcut to success. It's hard work, and you never reach the pinnacle. You're always reaching for something better, or filling in gaps of weaknesses in our educational curriculum, whatever it takes to stay valid, to stay viable as a professional in this industry.
Yeah, that's valid and viable are important factors that people tend to overlook. Those are
I would agree.
An important piece that you touched on. So when you joined the firm, was the firm a residential firm, or were they residential and commercial, or residential commercial specialty? What was it like back in that time frame post-college?
We were already a residential and commercial appraisal firm.
Oh, I see.
And my father also had a home inspection company, Allstate Building Inspection Services, ABIS. And so we were really what he would refer to as a full service appraisal.
Oh, yes.
And, his form of marketing back in the day was heavy marketing through the yellow pages or through the ERC directory for employee relocation council members. And, we didn't do a lot of face-to-face business development back then. In fact, with certain appraisal organizations back in the 80s and before, it wasn't always considered good form to advertise our services. It was considered to be a dilution of the professionalism that they were trying to attain. But my father, he didn't succumb to those feelings. He was always pretty effective, I should say prolific, in our yellow page advertisements. They were always real big.
That's important. Size mattered. I mean, some people don't understand. It's not about page one on Google. It was about when you got to a certain section of the yellow pages, not the white pages, because there were two colors back then.
Yes.
Yeah, and you might even have a color yellow pages ad as opposed to just a single color.
Yeah, we like to think, we being the people that have worked here, like to think of my father as being, ahead of his time in terms of the business development tools that he would use just to gain visibility, keeping track of how clients thought we were doing for them, soliciting feedback. We did lots of surveys back then. Like any appraiser or appraisal firm, I think we've all graduated as time goes on and as industry expectations for the quality of our work product, we've all just gotten better at what we do. At least that's the goal. And we're no different. I mean, the public's expectations, and I should say the users of appraisal services expectations, have evolved over the years. And in my opinion, appraisal reports today, if they're completed by competent appraisers, reflect a level of support and defensibility that exceeds that we were accustomed to in the early days.
I think that's a great point. And one of the interesting things you touch on, that a lot of people, because they're technically proficient, but they're not necessarily business-minded, you mentioned your dad's approach being a prolific advertiser in the yellow pages, and then advancing and expanding how you all have done that. A lot of people may not know much about Allstate Appraisal. I happen to be in the market, know a lot about you guys, but from the standpoint kind of going back in time, so your dad was advertising and you had some like a directory like the ERC. How did you all start to expand beyond that?
We began performing appraisal reviews almost as a fluke. Back in the day, I think any appraiser who listens to your podcast who was appraising back in the 1970s or 80s or even the early 90s, but primarily in the 80s, we would receive our appraisal orders via telephone calls from our clients. And then ultimately, fax machines, which had those thermal paper rolls that would print out, the orders in a nice curled up, hard to read piece of thin paper. That having been said, I was, after about 3 years of working here, maybe it was year 4. It was 1991, so I guess year 5.
Got it.
I was reviewing appraisals. I was already an SRA. I had attained the SRA designation in 1990. So I felt that I had attained some level of competency as a residential appraiser. And I was one of the staff reviewers here at that point in time. So I kind of graduated from appraising in the field full-time to doing some field work and also performing a quality control function on our staff appraisers' work product. And I would go to the front office in our office building and grab the physically completed appraisals, grab the reports and bring them back to my office. And one day when I was doing that, one of the girls who answered our phones, the phone would ring all day long from clients like every other appraisal firm at that time. And she put a call on hold and said, we're being asked if we can perform an appraisal review for this lending institution. It was on line 1. And I said, they want to pay us to do an appraisal of somebody else's prepared report? And she said, yes. I said, tell her that we'd be happy to help her. So we began doing appraisal reviews. It was a fluke phone call. She found us in the yellow pages, and I'm being zero. I know the name of the firm, and I know the woman who called. I'll never forget. It was Vicki Spears from Hamilton Financial. I haven't talked to her in probably 30 years, maybe longer. And I haven't heard of Hamilton Financial in probably just as long. We haven't kept in touch. But anyway, the point is we began doing reviews, and that became a division fairly quickly. And the lenders that we were doing pre-funding and sometimes post-funding quality control reviews for, we began getting requests to expand our service territory beyond the Chicago metro area. And reluctantly, we went into Northwest Indiana and then Southern Wisconsin. And then after a number of years of performing reviews for a wide variety of clients at that point in time, we found that by the mid-1990s, we were performing appraisal reviews for a variety of lenders regionally. And then in 1998, and this is definitely a Cliff Note version of the story. It might not seem that way to listeners, but it is a Cliff Note version of the story. In 1998, we agreed to accept these orders nationally. We were outsourcing them to local appraisers. So we were already acting in the capacity of a vendor management company before the acronym AMC was even in existence.
Yes.
Which as you and I have discussed in a prior phone call, that became fashionable after Dodd-Frank financial reform in 2010. So we really have been an appraisal management company longer than any firm that I can think of that we compete with. It doesn't make us better or more interesting, but we've been in the space a long time.
Yes.
And it all happened from a fluke phone call that presented an opportunity for a type of work that we weren't performing, for a client that we weren't working with, and we just kind of ran with it.
I mean, I think that's such a wonderful acknowledgement of someone, in this case, your father, had made the effort to actually communicate outbound to the marketplace in the form of yellow pages, and someone had a need, and they called up and asked, which is not an uncommon experience, even still to today, but that it was the willingness to take the call, discuss what's needed, and say, yes, you want to pay us? Like, oh, that's fantastic. We do them for free internally. But yeah, I'd love to get paid. And sure, we might be willing to go beyond, this little market area that we're in. And over a period of time, that transitions ultimately into a national opportunity. That's fantastic.
Well, one caveat to that was the reason why we agreed to begin expanding our service territory was because the first lender, whose name I mentioned, that began ordering reviews through us, had called me after a number of months of me actually preparing reviews for them, asking if we'd be willing to take more of their work, if we were willing to reduce our fee or meet the fee that their other source of reviews was charging them.
Always love that phone call. You're like, thanks,
I know
client.
that's a common request, but we didn't know if our fee was too high or too low. I was thrilled to be getting anything to be paid to review the work. That having been said, she mentioned they were using a firm. And I don't mind mentioning their name. They're no longer in business, but I was duly impressed. She said, Steve, we're using a company called Foster Owsley Conley out of California, handling reviews for us all over the country, or maybe it was in the states that they were lending in. I don't know, all 50 states. And I remember saying to this woman, I said, you're using a firm that's providing reviews to you all over the country? How are they doing that? So Foster Owsley Conley is, I understand it, I might be wrong, but I don't think so, I think was the nation's first national appraisal review services firm.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And, they had a very illustrious past. They were the first to market. And then there was a few other competitors that shared similar stature in the industry, along with what used to be called Foster Owsley Conley. And then there was us. Those firms are no longer operating. They probably sold or merged. And they definitely were fuel in my tank that if somebody else was doing it, I'd like to pursue the opportunity for us to do that if we're able to do so.
That is, what an amazing experience. Again, I think you said it. It was a fluke phone call. You followed the client. You took on a request that otherwise seemed atypical and nothing that you had thought about. And suddenly you're like, what? People get paid to do this? At what scale? I have found that to be one of the most enjoyable things in the conversations with peers and guests on the podcast, where you're like, yeah, I guess somebody does get paid to do that. And for one reason or another, I don't know about it, or have never been exposed to it, or haven't thought about it. But someone has a need somewhere doing something. And look, that involves time and materials and expertise and education. And, ultimately that translates into money's changing hands. And I think that's one of the most interesting things around this podcast are the insights that people have gained. They're like, I didn't know that people got paid to do that kind of service or to be employed in the industry in that capacity. It's like, well, that's the beauty of a podcast, is you get to hear from people who you'll probably never meet and hear stories that you'd never be sitting around a campfire and hear. And yet it helps pique your interest, if not propel your professional development. So here you guys are, you become a national firm in 1998, and you guys have stayed in that capacity, almost going on soon 4 decades later.
Yeah, yeah. The point you made is that opportunities can lead to other opportunities. And when young appraisers might reach out to me on occasion asking about the industry, hey, I'm considering this as an industry. Your name was given to me by so-and-so, a mutual acquaintance, to share some time to give me some ideas of what I could expect in this industry. I tell them the industry is extraordinary. And there are so many opportunities, even in times like today where everyone is reeling from the reduction in appraisal order volume, which is a direct result of the reduction in lending activity.
Yes.
From the abrupt increase in interest rates from, what was 2.5% roughly during the pandemic to tickling 8% today, which, Michael, you and I both recognize, historically speaking, 8% is not a shockingly high interest rate.
You and I had mortgages at those levels. I mean, that's no big deal.
In '86, in May of '86, when I began working here, I have to check Google on this. But if I'm not mistaken, interest rates had just dropped below 10% or below 9.5%. And there was a massive refi boom because borrowers couldn't believe their good fortune. They can borrow money at 8 or 9%. So the market, in my opinion, will ultimately level off. People's shock or surprise at the abrupt increase in interest rates will likely become an acceptance of the new norm again, or a return to what is the new norm. So I'm always optimistic, but I recognize it's a very challenging time for most of us in the industry right now for the obvious reasons. There's just less refi and lending activity taking place, but everything is cyclical. But I still tell people who call asking what are the opportunities, I don't dissuade them from getting involved in the industry, despite a lot of the negativity that we hear on the bulletin boards and so forth. Lots of that is legitimate negativity, but there are opportunities in this industry for entrepreneurial or for hardworking, focused individuals. And it's not limited to appraising houses or commercial properties. There's opportunities. I'm so sorry about that.
It's all right. That's probably a review calling you right now.
I'm not even sure how to turn that off. We have these new VoIP phone systems, which
that's fine. It's all good.
Perplexed. but appraisal, conventional appraisal on houses or commercial properties is the tip of the iceberg. There are so many other opportunities for appraisers to pursue business if they are truly focused on success. And maybe a discussion for another day, or maybe a follow-up question. We pursued that as our source of versatility in our business model. If we were limited to just house appraisals and an occasional commercial order, it would be kind of a roller coaster from a revenue perspective. And so we've tried to fill in the voids of cycles in the industry, which present themselves every year or every few years, by having different divisions that we focus on that are maybe less heavily trafficked by other appraisers. Some are areas that you wouldn't focus on, or some are areas that you wouldn't feel maybe make sense for you, not you specifically. So it's complex, condemnation work, litigation support work.
Yes.
But there's so many avenues for possible revenue sources in our industry, and it's just a business. At the end of the day, I run an appraisal business, but the same tools that I use, the same focus, the same dedication, I believe can be applied to any business if you're pursuing success. They're not limited to our industry. You have to be persistent in your goals to improve. You have to provide something to the market that they're asking for at a price that they're willing to pay that's consistent, hopefully, with prevailing market norms. And you got to consistently deliver on what you promised, not just periodically. Keep your finger on the pulse of those relationships and kind of keep track of what the market direction is taking. Right now it looks bleak, but I only think that's temporary.
That we would definitely agree with that, and kind of bringing it back, because again, you have such a unique perspective, having had the opportunity for a long-standing working relationship with your dad in a business that started out local, ultimately has become and maintained its status as a national firm. How did that develop? Because for people that may have an opportunity to work with a family member, or maybe even consider getting involved in a family firm, you brought some unique ideas and some unique talent, and to the credit of both you and your father, you all found a way to work together. Heard a lot of stories over the years from people who tried it and it did not work out. And now there's two firms with the same name in the market, not one.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, I was lucky to have a father who, I loved and got along with, and we simply didn't have any problems. We worked very well together. And I recognize it was a fortunate integration of two different people working in the same company. I mean, there was no focal point on hierarchy, and this is, my division, that's your division. We worked together towards a common goal. We enjoyed working together. He was very encouraging for me. I mean, he was always my support, beacon. So as a young person, obviously there was many moments of uncertainty or insecurity about how to address a certain appraisal. He was just always there as a beacon of confidence for me. I was lucky. I was fortunate. I know it's not always the same story for everybody. But, there was no licensing back in the 80s. It wasn't until 1993. And I think most residential appraisers or commercial appraisers who were working back then would acknowledge the industry didn't always consider us, or I should say the public didn't always consider us as a profession, maybe more so as a trade. Yeah. But that did change with licensing. And, some might even argue today that we're not given the same respect that I think we have earned or deserved relative to other professions. But that having been said, I still love the industry. And look, we're going through a cycle. It's a challenging time, but is the grass really greener on the other side of the fence? I mean, doesn't every industry have these types of challenges that present themselves at different times? I don't feel that we're disadvantaged, but it's definitely, this makes men out of you. This particular cycle is challenging for a lot of people because there has been an abrupt reduction in conventional lending-based order volumes.
Now that makes a big opportunity for people to consider. But sure, I mean, this is a more difficult time in the industry. This industry's been through many of these. It's going to go through more of these in different capacities, and the industry will continue to evolve. Even if it evolves slower than other industries, nonetheless it will. And yet, I think to the testament of the work that your father did and the work that you've continued, you have a perspective, as you talked about, investing in multiple segments of the industry, because at no one time are all facets, if you will, of valuation, however broadly or narrowly people want to define it, functioning, or I should say hitting on all cylinders. If one cycle's stronger, another cycle might be a little weaker, but the ability to be more diversified provides a much greater cushion, especially when you get to a time like this. If you're a one-trick pony, it's a tough time to be a pony.
Yeah, I agree. Listen, it's a business, and business you can't be complacent, right? In anything that we do, complacency will not propel you to success. It was easy for everyone to feel somewhat complacent when interest rates were sub 4%, because even if you were a substandard appraiser, your phone was ringing off the hook from anybody who was, anxious to get their appraisal orders placed. You didn't have to be a great appraiser to generate a lot of business when there was that much volume. And there is some concern that if appraisers continue retiring at the pace that they're retiring, and new participants in the industry don't come at a replacement level to those retiring, that the market will continue searching for alternate valuation sources that don't always include conventional appraisals.
Yeah.
On the other hand, who knows? I mean, we've had lots of situations that I would call prior perceived extinction events that really didn't materialize. And here we are again, another year of business. So I'm always the optimist, but what's the alternative, right? So, when things get tough,
yes,
you got to kind of roll your shirt sleeves up and just get to work. And we're working hard like everybody else to stay busy. We don't have any advantage. I mean, we succumb to the same challenges that all appraisers do: fee pressures, scope creep, sometimes clients who are easier to work with than others, or some are less easy to work. It affects us the same exact way. We're not immune to any of it, but we're forging forward. And different divisions here collectively do help, but they don't completely resolve the abrupt decline in temporary order volumes.
Now, that's definitely the case. And I think what's interesting, and you alluded to it earlier, and I'll kind of bring us back to that, for others to gain perspective of how much things have changed and how some things haven't changed, which was, we used advertising as one example, but also you mentioned getting orders via the phone. They previously came in the mail, then they got them over the phone, and then the fax machine. How would you all say, as you got more involved in the management responsibilities and ultimately leadership responsibilities to the firm, going back to the 90s, coming through the 2000s, would you say you guys were early adapters of technology? Were you guys kind of a wait and see approach, or you're like, hey, we'll try it once we know it isn't broken? Like, where would you all say you fit in that capacity?
I don't know if we were early or not. I mean, in May of '86, we had a computer system, and it was a large system in a separate room, a CompuCore system with tapes like what you see on black and white movies. I mean, I do remember when we switched to desktop appraisals in 1986, 87. And our first computers here were what we refer to as 8088s.
8088, of course. For those people who don't know, that is, look it up on the internet. Go to Google, 8088.
Yeah, and the hard drives were 10 megabytes.
Oh, that was massive back then. Absolutely massive. Because friends, there were no photos back then. Just for our younger listeners, there were no photos back there hogging up all the space. It was just black and white text.
Yeah. And then we were an early adopter for the, oh boy, I forgot the name, not Logitech, but Logic Man or something. The first digital cameras that were available in the industry. I forgot the name. That having been said, we bought them for every appraiser thinking this would give us a big advantage over our local competitors. But the pixel quality was very poor. The time it took to upload those and get those into your forms was very time consuming.
Yes.
And we temporarily went back to conventional 1 hour photo services after trying that technology initially. So were we early adopters? I think we were adopting at the pace that was necessary to stay relevant. Once we began hitting the Pentium speed computers, then we networked to the office, we felt that we were up to par technologically. And we are still, we have a full-time IT department here right now with several employees because there's a lot of technology that is required for information security, business continuity, for everything, and obviously encryption. So yeah, we're almost considered to be, I would say, as appraisers today, more technically dependent than we've ever been.
Yes.
And it's fine. It isn't really overwhelming to us as long as I have somebody helping me do it with an IT background.
Hey, it is very helpful at times. I had that experience this weekend. I was chatting with someone and I was like, hey, here's my phone, just put your information in there. And he's like, well, if you just change this little feature here and there. I'm like, no, I didn't know that. I was like, why would I know that, all those different capabilities for entering data? I was like, I just kind of use the same couple things and they work well, I guess.
Just what you and I are doing right this moment, we're having a video call and a conversation, would never have occurred to me as being a possibility other than the movies in the 1980s.
Yes.
Obviously, the cell phones that we all use in the whole globe contains more technology than my entire office had in that room filled with floor-to-ceiling computers in the 80s. Not even close, right? There's
not even close.
But that's fine. I mean, look, we use technology to the extent that we're able to use it. There are some firms that use it in a more pronounced manner than we do. We think that we are consistent with what is typical among our competitors insofar as our reliance on technology. It is not overwhelming, but it's absolutely imperative with what we do with everything.
Yeah, that is absolutely fantastic from that standpoint, to stay concurrent with the market. But one of the other interesting things is at an early stage, you all had the opportunity to go national. How did you all support that? Because for people that don't have perspective now and they're thinking, how do I branch out? You accomplished this more than 20 years ago. And was that just with great spreadsheets and line ruled pages, or you were back then, you obviously had moved beyond the first iteration of desktops. What was your all's approach to that?
I'm not trying to dumb it down. Honestly, it was dedication and hard work. And I'm being serious. It was consistent business development efforts. I had an advantage of trying to expand our company's client base. The advantage was I had a father running, the day-to-day, and we had staff and managers and so forth and staff appraisers. And it enabled me, it afforded me to be able to get out and visit with clients or prospects. And I spent a lot of my time in business development. I wasn't a salesperson, but I'd visit our clients. I'd acknowledge and show respect and appreciation for their business. I'd listen to them in terms of their feedback. What could we do better? What could we do differently? I mean, we were never perfect, but we were always seeking ways to improve upon our services to our clients. I spent a lot of time pursuing new sources of business in the markets that we were serving. And that meant lots of traveling and so forth. So I recognize that historically, the appraisal profession has been filled with, sole proprietors or smaller shops. And I think in a large degree, it's still, I know there's more AMCs than ever, right? But historically, mom and pop shops couldn't afford to have somebody full-time in business development. An appraiser would typically do their own appraisals. And if they stopped doing appraisals to generate business, they weren't generating billing. And it was difficult. That's just the nature of our industry. But I would say to those in the space today, I mean, I think every successful appraiser recognizes that what we do as appraisers is a combination of not just appraisal, but business development and staying on top of technology, trying to do things compliantly, We are here to serve the public, and I'm not saying that to sound like I'm wearing a halo over my head, but we are here to serve the public and to do so in a manner that protects the public's best interests. And to be able to afford to generate new business doesn't mean you got to do it every single day full time, but it has to be part of your business model. Perpetuating existing relationships, pursuing different sources of business, always looking for ways to improve upon your own work product or business flows. It just becomes part of our day-to-day here. Every single business day, I'm reaching out to somebody that we work with in some capacity, as I'm sure you are. There's nothing unusual or unique about that. But we only became larger due to a concerted effort to become larger. And larger isn't better. It's just the path that we chose. I know plenty of appraisers who are extraordinarily successful who made a decision not to become too big. They want to control their day-to-day. They don't want to be serving markets where they might not have geographic competency. They want to limit their liability or at least their business focus to markets that they're most active in. It's a personal decision if you want to become a small, medium, or large size firm. It's what's best for you.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And so, I think that's one of the challenges a lot of people deal with is it's one thing to appraise properties. It's quite another to have to deal with administration, management, and coordination. And that's something that obviously you've done well because you're still around and other firms haven't. It's quite an undertaking to be able to manage people that you can sit next to and stay connected with. But when you start expanding nationally, how did you all handle that approach?
Well, we certainly had to staff up accordingly.
Oh yeah.
We've been sometimes in the right place at the right time. Hence that phone call in 1991 I told you about the review services. But doing reviews led to the introduction to other sectors of the business. Some of those were non-lenders, some were governmental, some were quality control firms. Our client types are relatively varied, and it wasn't necessarily on our whiteboard to pursue each of these divisions that we're active in today. They really were just being in business and trying to do a good job and catching the attention of people in different sectors that reached out to us, either through referral or they'd heard of us through somebody else. We just pursued opportunities.
So, Steve, you were just saying about the growth and the opportunities that came that way. When you look at how far you've come and really how much things have evolved in the past, say, decade and a half, how diversified are you all so people can kind of get a sense of it's not just talk, like you guys literally have touched in a number of different segments of the valuation services space?
We have a residential division and a commercial. Mm-hmm. We do a lot of litigation support work for a variety of law firms for different reasons. A lot of appraisers have occasion to do divorce appraisals and estate appraisals. And there's plenty of other opportunities if an appraiser chooses to work with law firms. But the first thing that an appraiser needs to decide is if they're willing to testify if called upon to do so. And not all appraisers, no matter how extraordinarily competent they may be, are necessarily confident testifying if they haven't had that experience before. So that is a big decision. But I find that to be a very rewarding component of my practice, is given those occasions to testify. It's, I think, the ultimate challenge in terms of preparation, competency, poise, but it takes time and some effort. But we also do a variety of things that are a little bit less common. I do appraisal reviews, or I should say my firm and I, we still conduct appraisal reviews for a variety of different client types and reasons. Our work is not limited to lenders. There's a whole world of prospective clients that use our services, ours being appraisers nationally, that don't occur to every appraiser initially. Some of the more unusual things that, we don't do this, but appraisers sometimes get orders from bail bondsmen. Literally an appraisal is required for bail bonds. I hear it's a very active source of work that we don't do. There's appraisers that choose to do work for tax appeal purposes, and that can be very lucrative if you have a name for yourself. We don't pursue that work aggressively, but when the phone rings, we'll take those orders if they're looking for a competently prepared, impartial appraisal. But that having been said, we also do work for government entities and government-sponsored entities, and so I'd say that our diversification is pretty good. It's not perfect, but I'm comfortable with it. And we're always giving consideration to other possible sources of revenue that require valuations. We're always exploring what else might be available. And there are firms that do much more than we do, but we seem to do more than the average, for example, sole practitioner, in that we're not limited to just lender-based assignments.
That makes great sense. And do you all operate on a a W-2 or 1099 model or both?
Well, our staff is all W-2, the folks that work here in the Chicago metro area. But we also have independent contractors like most appraisal management companies. And we're both a local appraisal firm as well as an appraisal management company. And our managers and staff appraisers and staff reviewers and account reps and compliance people, IT people, those are all W-2 employees. I'm a W-2 employee. But the appraisers that we utilize in the markets that we serve nationally are independent contractors. And they're paid accordingly.
Oh, fantastic. That is fantastic. And then how have you typically gone around, or your firm, that's the thing that a lot of people on the other side, where you started out from being an appraiser, working on assignments, to actually getting involved with a firm, maybe like Allstate that's national. What type of things do they need to keep in mind, and how do they even get on a radar screen of a national firm like Allstate?
Well, I think that like in any profession, there's extraordinary companies and those that are maybe something other than extraordinary. And it's up to the individual appraisers to do their own research to ascertain what firms or AMCs they may hope to align themselves with. We compete with lots of AMCs nationally, and many of them we know do an exceptionally good job. Some are newer and, maybe they're not as experienced yet and don't have the same fan base that more mature and fair paying AMCs might have. But the point is, it's up to the appraiser, right, to determine who they choose to work with, and obviously to reach out to those entities, those AMCs, if that's the direction that they're pursuing, and make themselves available. I mean, obviously, if I was working for AMCs as a sole practitioner, I would try to align myself with those AMCs that have consistent sources of work in the markets that I serve and are willing to pay me, reasonable and customary fees, and obviously pay me on a timely basis. Of course, if I was an individual appraiser looking for work from AMCs, I'd hope to align myself with firms that, when they review my work, only kick back appraisals for legitimately material observations of non-compliance or errors, not wasting my time. I would appreciate, again, if I was an independent appraiser working for AMCs, I'd appreciate some respect, some mutual respect. If they're asking something of me for a correction, it's always a pleasure to work with other appraisers who to be competent as well, as opposed to maybe a clerk or an administrative person who can't even convey what they're trying to have you correct in a manner that makes sense. So just like when we pursue lenders or any other type of client that we work with, we all hope to work for high quality clients that appreciate what we're doing, that appreciate high quality work and dedication. And obviously, you can't underestimate the importance of being paid fairly for our time. And that's, of course, a huge concern for many appraisers, is compensation that they feel aligns with the scope of work of what they're providing to their clients each day. But they are in the driver's seat. You can fire clients that you're not happy with. Now, I know it's easier said than done when it's slow, right? You don't fire anybody when you're taking work in. And we're all willing to do what it takes to stay busy, right, to a certain extent. But I think, to answer your question directly, I'd be searching for high quality clients that I want to work with by making the appropriate inquiries with other appraisers, friends of mine in the industry, checking out their websites, hopefully calling them on the phone and having conversations. I think AMCs are an excellent source of work if you can find those that are busy and they're high quality companies.
Well, that makes sense. That absolutely makes sense. Given how much you all have had such an impact in the industry and across so many different segments of the market, what do you find, if at all, are differences between residential appraisers that you work with versus commercial appraisers that you work with?
Oh, insofar as my experiences or my firm's experiences of working with either residential versus commercial?
Yes.
Honestly, from our perspective, a competent, responsible appraiser who conducts him or herself in a manner conducive to a professional is a pleasure to work with, whether they're appraising houses for us or commercial properties. We're thrilled to have the privilege of working with appraisers who are competent, who are focused on customer service, just like we have to be with our clients. It is absolutely recognized immediately when we have independent contractors who turn their work in on the day that they're committing to, unless there's a viable reason that requires an extension, which is fine, who turn in work that reflects compliance with USPAP and reflect credible assignment results. We're lucky to have affiliations with appraisers across the country who do a great job, but it's also our responsibility to provide a quality control function as an AMC and to responsibly review that work product to help ensure that the assignments that the lenders are relying upon are reflective of credible assignment results per USPAP. So we are reviewing these reports not to introduce our own opinions of value ever. We're retaining local appraisers for their own opinions, but to review the work from a quality control perspective to help ensure that the appraisal as submitted to us supports the value contained in that report. We're not introducing sales for them to use. We're not introducing that the value should be X, Y, or Z. It's none of our business. It's their opinion that we're seeking. But when we do seek appraisers to make revisions to the reports, as I mentioned earlier, we're very careful to help ensure that they are material observations, not time wasters. If the observations of missing or incomplete analysis or an error or an inconsistency in appraisal we feel rise to the level of undermining the credibility of that value estimate, we're going to professionally and politely seek a revision. And those appraisers that we work with would likely, I'm confident, would likely say, if they were asked privately, that we're available to entertain their questions, to work with them, to explain why we're asking for something. But we try to work hard to make sure that that isn't necessary. When we're asking for a revision, we usually think it's self-explanatory.
That's fantastic. So Steve, given all that you've seen and experienced and had a long and vibrant career, what are you most looking forward to or optimistic about over the next 3 to 5 years?
Well, I'm certainly looking forward to greater volumes.
Oh, yes. I think we would all agree with that one.
You know, I know I'm redundant when I've said this. It's probably ad nauseum at this point, but I am optimistic always. And I think that we all have to be to continue succeeding in this industry. It is it's a cycle. It's a challenging cycle, like I've said. But I don't believe that this is a permanent change in our industry. It's just a longer runway than we're accustomed to. But I absolutely feel optimistic. I know there's going to be hard work ahead. We're working very hard right now. I'm attending conferences. We're shoring up our existing positions with clients. We're looking at operations to see what we can improve upon. We're looking internally at our own weaknesses to see what we can do better. I mean, we're doing all the things that everyone's doing. We don't have any secret sauce. I have 3 kids, and one is still in college, where I have 2 in college, but one's young enough in college where he's still got a couple of years left ahead of him to make a decision as to what career he might pursue. And I say to him, you know, I don't know if this is an industry for you or not. It's up to you, but I will tell you there are no shortcuts to success. And if you choose to pursue a career in this industry, it's hard work. And I think that's true of any industry. We're not at a disadvantage. I think that we have some influence over our individual destinies if we're willing to work hard, honestly, and most importantly, enjoy what we're doing so it doesn't feel like work or torture, that we're enjoying it. I truly still love coming to work each day, and this is my 37th year. And I think any of my staff members would tell you the same thing. Steve seems to enjoy coming to this building every single day. I enjoy it. It's been a rewarding career, and I think there's plenty of opportunities going forward for appraisers coming into the industry. It might look different than it has historically. The types of services that we provide might change a little bit, but I think that the need for appraisal services will always be here in some capacity. But like any industry, it changes and it evolves.
That's fantastic. Well, Steve, I really appreciate your time today. And I'd like to speak for those that'll get a chance to listen. And, you know, not everybody has an opportunity to be in the industry for 37 years and take over a family business and take it national. It's a rare accomplishment. It's a feat that very few will even have a chance at, much less succeed at accomplishing. So congratulations on that. And thank you for sharing just a little bit of the archives for many who haven't had a chance to meet you yet in this profession.
Well, I appreciate talking with you. I love what you're doing with your podcast. They're enjoyable to listen to, and you ask great questions. I'll look forward to talking with you again in the future.
Wonderful, wonderful. And everyone, again, make sure to hit that like button. Please continue to share it out. There's a lot of people still that have heard but not had a chance yet to listen to any of our podcasts. And as we approach this point of season 3, we are excited for just an astounding group of accomplished peers, and looking forward to season 4 right around the corner. So with that, thank you so much, and keep on appraising.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Paru Zing's Appraisers on Purpose. We hope you enjoyed learning from the amazing life paths and achievements of our guests. Don't forget to like us on LinkedIn and other podcast channels to hear more from appraisers and valuers regarding their life and their work. If you have any suggestions or questions for future episodes, we'd love to hear from you. Just send us a message on LinkedIn and we'll be sure to get back to you. Thanks again for listening, and until we're together again for the next session of Paru Zing's Appraisers on Purpose, create the change that you seek.